Let's begin with fallout from failed peace talks between Iran and the United States. After negotiations left Pakistan without a peace deal, President Donald Trump announced a U.S. naval blockade of Strait of Hormuz. Trump posted on his social media platform that warships would immediately begin stopping every vessel that has paid a toll to Iran to pass in or out of the Persian Gulf. The announcement came as talks in Islamabad ended with no agreement. Iran said the U.S. had failed to gain Tehran's trust, while U.S. Vice President JD Vance, who was at the talks, said the Iranians hadn't committed to never developing nuclear weapons.
JD Vance leaves Islamabad without a deal to stop the war in Iran. Before his departure, the U.S. Vice President said Washington's red lines were made clear and that Tehran chose not to accept their terms.
But the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations.
Still, Iran's foreign ministry expressed optimism for future talks.
One should not have expected that we could reach an agreement in a single session. I don't think anyone had such an expectation, despite the fact that this meeting was the longest we've had in the past year.
Host Pakistan urged both sides to uphold the temporary truce.
We hope that the two sides continue with the positive spirit to achieve durable peace and prosperity for the entire region and beyond. It is imperative that the parties continue to uphold their commitment to ceasefire.
In Iran, news of the stalemate was met with defiance.
I say to the gambler Trump that you have lost badly. The sooner you end it, the better for you.
No matter how much we extend a hand of friendship, they will eventually stab us in the back.
With the temporary ceasefire expiring on April 22nd, both sides now face a choice: escalate or return to the negotiating table.
For more on this, let's bring in Maliha Lodi, Pakistan's former ambassador to the United Nations. She also served as the country's ambassador to the United States and to the UK. Hello and welcome, Ambassador. How did Pakistan manage to bring the US and Iran to the table in Islamabad? And why was Pakistan trusted for this role?
Well, to start with, Pakistan has excellent relations with Tehran and also with Washington. And Pakistan's Army Chief, Field Marshal Asim Munir, has a particularly close relationship with President Donald Trump. So from this, you can conclude that Pakistan was uniquely positioned to play the role of a mediator, which it did. It persuaded the two countries to the negotiating table. It got them to exchange messages, which led to a ceasefire ahead of the talks. And then, of course, it was host in the capital of Pakistan, Islamabad, for the talks that were the first high-level exchange face-to-face between the US and Iran in almost 4 decades.
I mean, as you say, it was historic indeed. Unfortunately, the meeting ended with no deal. What do you make of how things ended in Pakistan?
Well, to start with, to expect that a few hours or 1 day of negotiations would produce a deal between two countries whose positions are so far apart, I think it was unrealistic, that expectation. So I would say that there was no breakthrough, but there was also no breakdown. In other words, both delegations went away, keeping the diplomatic option open. And I'm quite confident that back-channel communication between them will continue. So we have to keep our eyes on the ceasefire. So long as that continues, because neither side has said that that is under any kind of threat or jeopardy, then I think at least there is space for renewed diplomatic engagement.
Right. I mean, look, the US Vice President JD Vance seemed to suggest that the main sticking point was Iran's nuclear program. How likely is it that Iran will accept U.S. terms on scaling it back?
Well, I don't know what Vice President Vance really meant, because Iran has already said that it will be willing to give commitments that it will not seek a nuclear bomb. And in any case, that is the American version about the sticking point. The sticking point was also the Strait of Hormuz. The sticking point was also, from the Iranian perspective, getting an assurance and a commitment from the US that there will be no further military attacks by the US or Israel on Iran. So I think, we have to put all of these issues in perspective. Both countries had a set of demands. The Americans had a 15-point list, and the Iranians had a 10-point list. And these were divergent. So it takes time to come to some kind of an agreement on such complicated issues. Yes, sure, the nuclear issue is a core US demand, but then you have to also see it from the Iranian perspective. They also have these assurances that they need and commitments that they need. They want unfreezing of the assets. So, all of this means that further negotiations will be needed to try to narrow the positions of the two sides.
Right. Let's hammer a bit more on the Iranian side. Well, the Speaker of Parliament for Iran said that the U.S. failed to gain trust of the Iranian delegation in the peace talks. So makes me wonder, can there be negotiations without trust?
Well, some degree of trust, yes. But how can you have two countries that have been at war for almost 6 weeks to start trusting each other in 2 hours or 5 hours or 21 hours? The talks went on for 21 hours. It takes time, and it takes a longer process to build the kind of trust that is needed for conclusive negotiations. So I would say, and I have been saying this, that diplomacy is not a one-day event. It's a process. And both parties have to have the patience to go through this process and then see if they're serious about negotiations and then see where they can make the compromises that are needed, because peace cannot come on the terms of just one party. It has to come on mutual terms.
Right. The question will always be how much time is needed for this to happen. But fair point that you're given there. Given how far apart the US and Iran still are on issues like sanctions, nuclear issues, and the Strait of Hormuz, do you believe we are any closer to a breakthrough?
No, I don't think so. But I think it will require many rounds of talks and a great deal of back-channel communication to come to a point where perhaps the next round of negotiations can bring the two parties closer together. I mean, the issues are very complicated. So I think time is needed.
How do you view the role of Israel in all of this, especially as strikes continue in Lebanon?
Israel is a spoiler. It is a spoiler which is trying to disrupt. It tried to sabotage the talks in Islamabad, because within hours of the ceasefire being announced, Israel started the most fierce attack on Lebanon so far, in which almost 300, in fact, even more people have already been killed. So why did Israel do this? Obviously, it knew that there is a ceasefire. It knew that talks are about to take place, and yet it went ahead with this. So what should we conclude from this? It's clear Israel is unhappy with any kind of deal between the US and Iran, and will do whatever it can to undermine it and to torpedo it.
What do you think will make Israel happy?
That's for Israelis to decide. I can't answer that question.
Fair enough. So if diplomacy fails, what is your assessment of the risk level for a return to active hostilities in the coming weeks?
Well, I think if that was going to happen, although I think right now it is in the interest of both countries, Iran and the United States, not to return to conflict. But should there be a revival and a readoption of the war, I think then the war will enter perhaps its most dangerous phase so far. Already President Trump has announced a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. It's a very dangerous escalation. And if he also then tries some kind of a ground offensive to seize the Strait of Hormuz, to take it away from Iranian control, then we are looking at, again, an extremely dangerous situation. So this kind of escalation can really, further destabilize the region, which is already in such chaos.
Right. Which is why all eyes are on Pakistan for trying to bring about peace. So what steps can Pakistan take next to sustain the ceasefire and keep both sides engaged in dialogue?
Well, Pakistan has already urged, its deputy prime minister has already made a public appeal to both the United States and Iran to maintain and sustain the ceasefire. Pakistan will continue to play a role on the back channel to try to get the two parties to return to diplomacy. The diplomatic path, in Pakistan's view, is the only viable way in which we are going to get to some kind of a peaceful solution. A war has been tried for almost 5 weeks. And has that brought the United States, which is, of course, the country that committed aggression against Iran? Iran didn't start the war. The US and Israel did. But the question is, did it bring them any closer to the objectives they seek? The answer is no. So if the answer is no, then diplomacy is the only option. And that is what Pakistan will continue to emphasize. And of course, it will continue to offer itself as a mediator between the two countries.
Right. Maliha Lodi, Pakistan's former ambassador to the United Nations, the United States, and the UK. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.